I pushed open the bedroom door and saw the hotel keycard face down on the nightstand next to a small carry-on bag. Fear tightened my throat before my feet moved. I could feel every heartbeat in my wrists. Ethan was in the half, dark by the closet, folding a shirt with hands that did not look like someone making a normal trip. My first thought was not argument. It was, he is leaving me. That fear shaped everything I did next. I stepped into the room with the sound of my own shoes, and the air smelled faintly of cedar from Ethan's jacket and a coffee mug he must have left hours ago. I did not sit. I set the keycard on the bed and touched the zipper of the bag with one finger, testing its weight. My hands trembled. I said, "Ethan." Loud enough to fill the hall. He did not turn at once. When he did, his face was flat, as if the muscles refused to register surprise. "What are you doing home so early, Maya?" "Ethan." His voice was low, controlled, the voice I had learned to read like semaphore during long, quiet months. "What is this?" I asked, and I pointed at the keycard. My words came out tight. "Where is this for?" Ethan closed the closet door slowly, as if closing it would contain the conversation. "It's for a conference. I told you last month." He kept his hands in his pockets. "You must have missed the email." I stepped closer to the bed and lifted the keycard. The hotel name was printed small and plain. The date stamped on the receipt folded under the card matched tonight. My mouth went dry. Doubt flared first. Doubt that I had missed a sign. Doubt that my instincts braided worry into something worse. Then the old pattern pulled. The choice between naming an issue and smoothing it over. My voice sounded small even to me. "Ethan, when did you pack this?" "Last night," he said. "I told you I needed to get away for a couple of nights." Luca appeared in the doorway before I could answer, having come up the building steps with a package for us. He saw the bed, saw the card, and said my name in a way that did not wait for explanation. "Maya." He set the package down and stayed at the threshold. Luca's eyes were steady. He has a way of making space without pushing. The morning after, I could not sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the bag the way you check under a blanket for a loose thread. Careful, nervous. I turned the fabric, thumbed a loose tag. I felt fear change into a sharper animal, anxiety that crossed into suspicion. I kept thinking, was he planning to leave me? Was there something here that explained months of distance? Ethan floated through the apartment in his business, casual clothes the way someone moves through a rented office. He answered questions with clipped phrases and kept his distance. At the door he left for work, he kissed my forehead with the rhythm of a habit. "I'll be back late," he said. "Don't worry about dinner." He put on his sleek metal watch and left. After he closed the door, I opened the bedroom drawer where he kept chargers and old receipts. I did so because the keycard tasted like an accusation and I wanted proof. My hands found a hidden envelope tucked behind a stack of bills. Inside were photographs taken at odd hours, me leaving the building, the back of my head seen from a car, a date, stamped log of places I had been. My stomach dropped. The photographs were precise and patient. They showed me the way someone calculates a map. I felt betrayal at first, a hot, bright thing in my mouth. Then betrayal cooled into something more connected to fear, violation. My fingers tightened on the paper and my breathing changed. I read a small notebook with notes about patterns in my days. I whispered, "Ethan," but he was at work and the word bounced off the empty rooms. I called Luca from the stoop and left the phone on speaker while he listened in the dark. "Luca, I found something in Ethan's drawer. He has—" I could not finish without my jaw locking. "He has pictures of me." Luca's voice was close and unhurried. "Stay where you are, Maya. Lock the door." "I'm coming up." He gave me a time and kept it exact. "Bring whatever you found. Don't touch anything else." When he arrived, Luca sat at the kitchen table and put his palms on the photographs, as if they were a heat source he could measure. "This is not a mistake," he said. "This is tracking." He did not look at Ethan or at me with pity. He looked at the images and catalogued them with a practical quiet. I switched between dread and a strange, stubborn need to understand Ethan's reasons. My thoughts shifted. Doubt, fear, anger. I said aloud, "I need to confront him tonight." My voice had the scaffolding of a plan in it, a brittle hope. We made a plan. Luca wanted me to record as much as possible, to stage a confrontation with witnesses. I agreed because action steadied me. In the afternoon, I pulled out the locket that always hung at my throat, rubbed its edge until the metal warmed, and put it in my pocket. I had no idea whether I kept it for memory or as a talisman against being left alone. When night came, I set the phone camera on the bookcase and left it facing the living room. I moved through the apartment like someone practicing courage. I heard the elevator before I saw Ethan, and the elevator's click inside his steps made my pulse jump. Luca stayed in the living room in plain sight. His presence made it harder for Ethan to use denial as a wall. The confrontation began with a question and a refusal. "Ethan, why are there pictures of me in your drawer?" I said. My hands refused to stop moving. I looped them into the sleeve of my sweater and out again. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You think I'm spying on you?" He did not say my name then. He stepped away from the kitchen island where he had been arranging a plate. His mouth was set. "Maya, it's not like that." Luca leaned forward. "Ethan, put the notebook on the table." Now, his tone was firm enough to act like a lever. Ethan's response bunched into tight sentences. I wrote things down. "I wanted to understand why you left the bed at night. You leave notes, receipts, His sentences came short. "I wanted to make sure you were safe." He sounded like a man explaining physics, not feeling safe. I said, "You tracked me, Ethan. You took pictures. You logged when I left the building." My voice did not shake the way fear did. It sharpened into accusation. "That's not safety. That's control." Ethan looked at Luca and then at me. "You remaking this worse." "Maya," my name finally, but there was wariness, not warmth. "You always see conspiracy everywhere." Luca's hand went to his phone, and he set it on the table to record what was happening. Ethan, answer her." He spoke my name. "Maya, listen." The room turned thin and electric. I felt anger grow into something else. Determination. I said, "Ethan, stop talking in fragments. Are you leaving? Is this suitcase for leaving tonight?" I stepped toward the closet and put a hand on the handle. "Answer me." Ethan's face changed for a second as if a hard wind had passed over him. "No, I'm not leaving," he said. I said, "Conference." "I told you." Luca did not look convinced. "Then explain the notebook with timestamps and the pictures." "Ethan." "Explain following her to the coffee shop and taking a photo at 9 p.m. last Tuesday." His words were short lines of accusation that landed like a series of knocks. Ethan's jaw worked. He sounded like he was reciting. I was worried. The gap between us grew and I didn't know how to fix it. "I thought if I understood her routine I could—" He stopped, swallowed. "I thought I could keep things from getting worse." "Keep things from getting worse." I repeated. "You didn't keep anything safe. You took away a choice. You made me a subject." "Ethan, you put me on a schedule." The next exchange was fast and raw. "Maya, you always make things dramatic." Ethan, you watched me like a stranger." I said. "I was trying to help," he replied. "Help." "Luca, helping doesn't mean photographing someone at night." Ethan slammed a hand on the counter, louder than his words. "You don't understand." "Explain it now," I said. 3 to 6 quick lines moved like hammer blows between us before silence returned. That rapid back and forth cut the room open. Each short sentence shifted who held the ground. The camera on the bookcase recorded a version of truth that our voices could not change. Ethan took a breath and forced out an explanation that sounded rehearsed. He drew a line between his fear and his actions without apology for the surveillance. "I thought if I knew where you were, I could fix us. I thought I could stop whatever was happening between us." His eyes avoided mine when he said fix. Hearing the word changed me. My emotional path altered. Fear flicked into anger. Anger edged into clarity. I realized I had been treating his distance as something I could soothe. I had not seen that his solution was to map me instead of speak to me. I stood up and packed the small bag with the few things I carried when I left the apartment for clarity. A sweater, the locket, my toothbrush. I did it with steady fingers. Luca handed me a small phone charger and a bottle of water without comment. The packing was a mechanics of leaving that made decision real. Ethan blocked the hallway when I moved for the front door. He put both hands on the doorframe and said, "Maya, don't leave like this. We can talk. We can go to therapy. We can—" I saw the desperation the set of his shoulders. He sounded honest and frightened. "Ethan, you followed me. You kept a folder of my photos. That's not repair. That's control." I tried to keep my voice even. He stepped closer and his voice dropped. "You were being dramatic, Maya. You always—" I shut that line off before he could finish. "Stop talking for me, Ethan. Say my name when you speak for yourself." My words moved like a small tool into the hinge of the argument. He lunged for the bag at my hip. "You can't just—" He grabbed the strap. His hand was frantic. I felt a hot press of panic and the old, reflexive fear that made silence easier than argument. For a second my body wanted to freeze. Luca's voice cut across the hallway. "Ethan, let go." He stepped between us and placed a hand on Ethan's chest to create distance. "Maya, go." Now Ethan's fingers tightened and then released. He had a look I had seen before, someone who cannot let the map go. I pulled the bag free and strode past him. My breathing was fast but not shaking. I had moved from fear to a focused urgency. The front door closed behind me. In the stairwell the air smelled like damp concrete and the building's heating. I slid down to the first landing and sat for a moment, folding my hands over my bag. Luca sat beside me and did not speak until the sirens on a street 2 blocks over faded. "What now?" I asked. My voice had a small steadiness but also a thread of rawness. Luca looked at me directly. "We get proof. We call someone if it becomes necessary, and you decide where you want to be safe tonight." He pronounced the last phrase quietly, as if it were a list that could be checked off. "Do you want me to drive you somewhere?" I thought about sleeping on the couch, about walking back up to the apartment and ringing the bell and facing what remained of us. My feelings moved again. Resolve started cold and then grew warm. Fear loosened its grip but did not disappear. I said, "Take me to the bench by the park. I need to breathe." We sat on the bench in the grey dawn light. The city smelled like wet pavement and exhaust. I held the locket in my palm and rolled the edge with my thumb. Luca handed me a paper cup of coffee that was still hot. He waited for me to speak. He had become in small concrete ways the support the word ally failed to describe. A presence who names facts and acts. "Mayor Luca, you made a choice to come out of the apartment. That is a decision. We'll sort the rest." He used my name to anchor me. "Do you want to call someone a friend? A lawyer?" I shook my head. I needed first to feel the facts in my body. I took a sip of coffee, felt the heat move from my lips to my chest. My fingers tightened on the locket until I could make out the tiny scratch along its edge, the one I had gotten when I was 20. That small physical memory steadied me more than saying I needed to be strong. We talked in short lines, names and times, the details that make action possible. "Ethan, it's a conference," I said, "but the dates match tonight." Me last month. I added he needed space. Luca repeated a few facts back. He about neighbors, whether anyone had seen Ethan leave. He suggested we go back with a witness to collect anything I needed, or to retrieve the locket if I wanted to sleep somewhere else. Each suggestion was a tool rather than a speech about feelings. An hour after dawn, a small sign shifted the course of the morning. A neighbor, Mrs. Patel, came up the path to the bench with a paper in her hand. "Maya," she said, "I found this by the lobby steps early. I thought you might want it." She handed me a receipt folded to a corner. I opened it and found an Uber receipt with a pickup time that matched the timestamp in Ethan's planner yesterday. The receipt listed the destination as an address 2 blocks away and the driver name typed out in full. The neighbor's face showed she did not want to be involved but felt compelled by kindness. Luca looked at the receipt and then at me. "This is concrete," he said. "It shows movement. It shows time. Do you want to take it to the police?" I folded the receipt into my palm and felt its edges press a line into my skin. I thought of calling the police, of pressing charges, of turning the photographs into evidence. I also thought of the knock-on effects, hearings, exposure, questions. The emotion within me moved again, from paralyzing fear to anger, then toward a brittle clarity. I put the locket on the bench between my hands. It was warm from my skin. "Luca," I said, "keep this for now. If this goes further, I don't want anything left behind that ties me here." I said it plainly. He hesitated and then took the locket. "Are you sure, Maya?" he asked. I stood up. The dawn was lifting and washing a thin gold down the street. My legs felt braced. "Yes," I said, "for tonight. I'm sure." I put my hand on the small carry-on bag at my feet and set my jaw. I did not say I was free of fear. I only said I would move differently despite it. As I walked toward Luca's car, I kept the morning's facts arranged in my head like a list. The keycard on the nightstand, the photographs in the drawer, the notebook with times, the receipt Mrs. Patel had given me. Each concrete item represented a decision point. Each one moved me away from confusion and closer to action. Luca opened the car door for me. He handed back the locket when he saw I had left it in his palm. He did so with a look that treated it like an evidence bag rather than a talisman. I thanked him and slid into the passenger seat. The car smelled faintly of leather and citrus. When he started the engine, I looked back once at the apartment block as it narrowed in the rear window. Ethan stood at the window on the third floor, a dark silhouette against the curtain. He raised a hand and did not move. I did not wave back. I had left the apartment. That was the immediate resolution of the night's conflict. The choice felt significant not because it was a speech, but because it was a physical act. I stepped around a hand that tried to take my bag, and I closed a door behind me. The chapter of the night had a concrete closing. I sat in Luca's car with the sunrise on the dashboard, the locket tucked in his palm on the seat between us, and the knowledge that tonight's decisions would require more lists, more facts, more witnesses. I put my hand on the strap of my bag and felt the fabric under my fingers. Luca started to drive. The street ahead showed a thin line of light that cut through the block, and I kept my eyes on it as we pulled away. My phone buzzed on the counter while the kettle was still rattling. I looked down and saw a photo that stopped my hands. Ethan in a hotel room mirror, his face turned toward the camera with someone else's shoulder visible behind him. Betrayal hit before I could think. I shoved the mug into the sink, water sloshing onto the wood, and that concrete, rising betrayal pushed me out of the habitual fog I'd lived in for months. I tapped the image until it filled the screen. The timestamp read 2 days ago. The bed looked like ours, only thinner, colder. A folded hotel brochure sat on the nightstand. My breath shortened. I had seen the hotel keycard on our nightstand once before. A pale rectangle in the dim the night he packed a bag, and that memory snapped forward violently. That keycard had been the first real piece of evidence. This photo made the wound real. I called Ethan. He answered after 2 rings. "Maya," he said, voice low, controlled. I heard the rustle of a shirt, a sound I had once found domestic. "Where are you?" I asked. The question came out small and hard. "Work," he said. "I'll be late," I said. "Is this you in a hotel?" He paused. "What photo?" he asked. The pause lengthened into something I could not name. Doubt pulsed against my ribs like a second heartbeat. I tried to steady the doubt into a question. "Ethan, I have a picture." He closed the distance with sharp calm. "Maya, I have calls." "We'll talk tonight." My name as if it were an interruption. I could hear the door click behind him. He hung up. The call ended without an answer, and my doubts slid into fear, not the abstract kind, but the practical, immediate fear that rearranged plans and made my hands grip the counter. I texted Luca. The message was short. "Can you come?" I left out what I had seen because writing it felt like throwing the word betrayal into the room, and I wasn't ready to speak it aloud. Within 20 minutes there was a knock. Luca's jacket hung at the doorway, the leather soft and worn. He looked at the phone on the counter and then at me without asking why. "Show me," he said. I handed him the phone. His jaw tightened for a second. He did not say the word I had already said in my head. He put the phone down and moved like someone who cleans up immediate danger. He opened the junk drawer and tossed out receipts until he pulled a small, crumpled paper from the back pocket of a folded billfold. A parking stub, a scratch of hotel ink. He set the receipt on the table next to the photo with his thumb pressing the corner down. Luca's motion shifted the room. He did things without dramatics. He cleared a space, brewed another pot, and set a hand on my shoulder long enough to count a heartbeat. His steadiness calmed some of the shaking in my fingers, but it did not stop the questions climbing my throat. Ethan's car could be anywhere. Luca carefully. "Do you want me to check the garage cameras?" I heard a different change inside myself then, a movement from frozen to action. The fear receded a degree and a new force took over. Resolve, thin and focused. We went through the apartment with urgency. I pulled under cushions. Luca checked the coat pockets. In a small space behind the couch I found something I had never expected. A single, small earring with a tiny pearl set in a simple silver mount. I held it between my fingers. The pearl had a faint scratch along its edge. The earring did not belong to me. I put it on the kitchen table next to the receipt. I felt the first hard shift. Suspicion had become evidence. The photo had been a shock. The receipt and earring were concrete items that tied time and place to a person. When Luca opened his phone and scrolled through footage he'd downloaded from the parking garage near Ethan's office, the coldness returned. In the footage, Ethan's car pulled into the hotel lot once, twice, 3 times. Dates stamped across the bottom of the frame. This is the same car, Luca. Pointing. August 21st, September 7th, October 1st. He named the dates like facts in a ledger. Ethan's car idled under dim orange lamps. The footage showed Ethan alone climbing the hotel steps twice and once with another person. When the image froze on the driver's face, I felt my breath leave the room. I waited for denial. Ethan walked in while Luca paused the video. He came through the front door with his briefcase, his watch clicking against the strap, his shirt still slightly rumpled. He put the briefcase down and looked at the screen. He did not sit. He stood and folded his arms like someone keeping a border. "What are you doing with my car?" he asked, voice flat. "Ethan," I said, and the name felt like a plea. "There are pictures. There's a receipt. An earring. Can you tell me what this is?" My voice did not shake at first. The airing of facts steadied me. Ethan's eyes moved to the receipt on the table. He looked at the earring and then at me. For a moment he kept his face like a wall. He answered tersely, "I can explain." The words were measured. He checked his phone as if the explanation had already been typed out in a work email. "Explain how?" Luca, voice steady. "Explain why your car was at the Clarendon on 3 different dates." Ethan's shoulders tightened. "This is private, Mayor. Not everything needs to be aired in the kitchen." He spoke like a man naming rules. I felt anger rise, a clear, hot line along the edge of my fear. "Private." I said, "You brought that keycard home. I found a bag. Now there are receipts and an earring. How is this private?" They moved into a tight exchange. "Mayor, stop." "Ethan, don't." "Don't what, Ethan?" Luca cut in. "Don't tell her to stop when she's holding evidence." Luca's voice was calm but sharp. "Maya, we have footage," he said. "He's at the Clarendon on other nights. He's not just working late." The argument tightened into quick, clipped lines. Ethan's sentences were short. "You shouldn't have gone through my things. You left the card on the nightstand. You never asked. I didn't hide anything from you. You were in a hotel room with another woman." Ethan's denial came as a brittle thing. He didn't plead. He deflected. Ethan's reply changed the tone from accusation to confrontation. I said, "It's private. I'm sorry you feel this way. I have meetings. I travel. I had a conversation with someone, that's all." His eyes slid away from mine when he said that last line. I watched his fingers fumble with the strap of his watch. He would not look me in the face and say the word. My stomach tightened. The second emotion shift happened fast, from anger back to a cold, rational fear that something familiar had been reinvented without me. "Who is she, Ethan?" I asked. The question landed between us. He swallowed. "She's a colleague," he said. "A consultant. Her name is Claire." He, the name like a label in a report. I said, "Claire." As if the spoken syllable could make the person more tangible. "Was there a room?" I asked. The question made our kitchen feel too small. Luca put his hand flat on the table. "Ethan, we have photos. We have dates. If there's nothing to hide, show us receipts with your name or the company expense." He spoke like someone who had already thought through procedure. The edge in his voice came from the fact that he'd watched the footage and called me over with no hesitation. Luca's role shifted from comfort to investigator. Ethan's eyes hardened. "You want my credit card. You want to open my email." He sounded almost amused for a second, as if the rules he followed at work could still shelter him at home. "I won't be interrogated in my own living room," he said. The way he said "own" made my chest compress. He stepped back and turned toward the hallway. I stepped forward. "No," I said, "you won't. But I'm not going to have you refuse to explain when there's evidence on my table." My voice trimmed itself to precise lines. Ethan's jaw moved. He took a breath far too slowly. Then he did something I didn't expect. He laughed, short and brittle. "I didn't expect this to be a courtroom," he said. "You remaking a scene, Mayor." The words were meant to push me off balance. Luca's phone buzzed. He looked down and then at Ethan. "I pulled more footage," he said, "from the parking level 2 weeks earlier. Same car. Claire leaves in the footage with him. She didn't look like a colleague waiting for a meeting." He spoke plainly. The room shifted again. That was the hidden twist, evidence beyond the receipts that made the story pattern clear. Ethan's face paled a touch. Ethan's response shortened. "You can't post this anywhere," he said. "You can't." He stopped as if stopping would hold back the tide. He pulled his keys from his pocket. "I'm leaving." His hands were steady while his voice broke. He walked out without slamming the door, but with a deliberate finality that echoed. When the door closed, the apartment felt unmoored. My knees wanted to bend. I made myself move. I gathered the receipt, the earring, the photo. I put them into a small bag I'd prepared months ago, but never used, an odd, practical habit I had kept for emergencies since the night of the keycard. That memory from before, the key on the nightstand, pressed against the new proof. The idea that I'd been living inside someone else's carefully managed calendar hit me like a second cold. Luca watched me pack. "You don't have to leave tonight," he said, "but we need to make a plan." His voice was steady. I felt another emotion shift, from shock to a quiet, procedural clarity. I knew what needed to be done in small, concrete steps. I would not make a speech. I would list things and act. I pulled out my phone and typed words I had rehearsed 100 times in my head. I called my sister but didn't tell her everything. I texted my manager to say I needed a day off. I moved like someone following a checklist. Find a safe place, secure documents, call a lawyer, change passwords. The list itself made the fear feel actionable. It replaced helplessness with an ordered set of tasks. Luca stayed. He folded his jacket and set it on the sofa. He made 2 bowls of soup and pushed one toward me. I ate without tasting much of it. "Do you want me to call Claire's number?" he asked. I closed my eyes for a second. The idea of confronting a stranger felt simultaneously like survival and like cruelty. "Yes," I said. "Find something. Anything," he nodded. He dialed a number he had found by searching a company directory. The call went to voicemail. Luca left a neutral message asking for confirmation of a meeting on a given date. He kept his voice flat. He told me afterward that the line had been curt and the mailbox standard corporate phrasing. It was not much. It was better than nothing. Another small external event had occurred, a neutral contact attempt that could be documented. By mid-afternoon, the neighborhood outside our apartment looked ordinary. A delivery van backed up 2 doors down. A child rode a scooter past the building. The normalcy made the evidence feel more raw. I slipped the earring into a small paper envelope and labeled it with the date. I went to the bedroom to retrieve the locket I always wore. I held it in my palm for a long time and then put it into the small bag with the receipt. The locket smelled faintly of coffee and the seam of my jacket. My hands were steadier now. The third emotion shift happened. Fear and suspicion had moved into resolve and practical grief. I was not yet certain what the end would look like, but I could see the immediate next steps. I could name them. I could act on them. That felt like a form of reclaiming. Ethan's phone buzzed on the counter after he had left. Luca picked it up reluctantly and flipped it open. There was a short message preview from a number saved as Claire. "Want to see you tonight, X." Luca's brow furrowed. He read it aloud without inflection. "Want to see you tonight." The room tightened. That message changed the shape of explanation into something less ambiguous. I called my sister and said, "He left. I'm taking a bag. Luca's with me." The sentence was plain. My sister asked, "Do you want me to come?" "Not yet." I said, "I'll call you tonight." I hung up and then sat for a moment on the couch. My phone felt heavier. I looked at the photograph on my counter again. Ethan's eyes were not closed. He looked like a man who had rehearsed distance. Luca stood, walked to the window and opened it a crack. The air smelled faintly of rain on pavement. "Do you want me to stay tonight?" I thought about arrangements and alarms, about the way I'd put my keycard face down months ago and later found it lying there again, and I said, "Stay. Please stay for the day. Not because I'm afraid of being alone, but because I need someone who can help me do the next things." I said the last line carefully, because I did not want to mistake fear for need. He sat back down and put his hand on the copy of my passport I had not yet thought to get. He read the list of tasks I'd scribbled in the margin of a receipt: lock bank cards, change passwords, copy receipts, call lawyer. I had made a plan in the kitchen that started with the evidence. We moved through the list one by one. Each checked item felt like a small, necessary repair. When evening crept in, I stood by the door with the small bag in my hands. The bag held proof, memory, and a few changes of clothes. I slid the locket back under my shirt and clipped it closed. Luca put his hand on the door frame and said, "Come back in the morning if you want." If you don't, we will file what we need to file." He did not say it in an exhortation. He it like a practical contractor giving the next steps of a job. I stepped outside into the building's narrow hallway and then down into the street. The light had the thin, late afternoon warmth that made shadows long on the pavement. I moved with the small, concrete decision of someone carrying documents to be filed. I did not promise myself anything grand. I only promised a sequence of factual acts: sleep at a friend's, call an attorney, change the locks if needed. At the curb, I paused and looked back up the steps toward our apartment. The door stood closed, an ordinary domestic object that had suddenly contained evidence and questions. I thought of the keycard face down on the nightstand from before and of the hotel receipt now in my bag. The two items connected into a chain of dates and choices. I felt grief. I felt a cold, clear resolve. I had moved from fear to action. That movement was not theatrical, it was quiet and precise. Luca slid his arm through mine and led me toward his car. He drove slowly. We did not speak much on the way to his sister's apartment, where I would spend the night. A single message arrived on my phone while we were stopped at a light. "Ethan, from an unknown number, we need to talk." I did not open it. I put the phone face down and breathed. The chapter's peak had been the confrontation at noon. The aftershock had been the choice to gather evidence and to leave. The final beat was this. I walked away carrying a small bag and my locket, and I stepped into daylight with a plan and a practical companion beside me. The night would not resolve the larger questions. There would be calls, paper, and more evidence to gather. There would be decisions that required forms and signatures. For now, the concrete outcome of the chapter was simple. I left the apartment with recorded proof, a witness present, and a step taken that changed my immediate situation. Luca parked, turned to me and said, "We'll start in the morning." I nodded. I closed my eyes for a second and felt the locket warm under my shirt. My hands were not trembling as much. That was not the end of everything, but it was the end of the morning's crisis, and the beginning of a controlled response to what had been revealed. I stepped into the foyer with a small, packed bag and said, "Ethan, I'm not staying tonight." Fear tightened my throat and kept my fingers clenched on the bag's strap. I had found a hotel keycard face down on the nightstand 2 chapters ago and an image on my phone that didn't need explaining. Fear was the reason I had learned to swallow questions and smooth over mornings. Fear had kept me in the same bed as someone whose hands could fold a shirt without lifting his eyes to mine. Ethan's footsteps stopped in the hallway. He didn't turn immediately. His voice when he finally spoke was low and measured. "Maya, what is this?" I stepped forward until the threshold cut a line across the floor between us. The packed bag sat heavy against my hip. I did not drop it, "Ethan. The key on the nightstand." He cut me off. "We already talked about this." That exchange, short, clipped, full of names, shoved us from polite distance into the argument I had been avoiding. The opening beat had to be immediate. A demand, a discovery, a boundary. It landed. Within those first sentences, I forced the problem into daylight. A husband leaving traces and a wife who had finally packed a bag. I am a 32-year-old woman who makes careful lists and drinks coffee black because it is simple. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment with a man who wears a sleek metal watch and answers questions in sentences that stop before they finish. I had found the hotel keycard face down on the nightstand and the photograph of Ethan in a hotel bathroom mirror. That photo had been the nail that pushed me to the doorway now. My life did not suddenly unravel. It had been fraying, and tonight I wanted to know whether I would be the one to cut the rope. Ethan crossed his arms. His face kept the same set of controlled features he used at work. "Maya, tell me what's really going on." I inhaled and felt the thin trimmer at the base of my ribs. The trimmer came with a second shift. Suspicion eased into a sharper fear, and the fear gave way to a small, hard anger. Those were quick moves inside me: doubt, fear, anger, so I spoke actions instead of abstractions. "There was a keycard on the nightstand," I said. "There was a photo on my phone." "You left receipts that add up to nights away." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Receipts don't mean what you think, Maya." He took a step back, keeping distance as always. I held my ground in the foyer. "Ethan, you packed a bag. You hid the key." "I am tired of guessing." He looked at the bag, then at me. "Maya, listen." The living room lights flicked on somewhere deeper in the apartment. The kettle in the kitchen clicked, and began to sit on the counter like an accusation. The ordinary noises of a home suddenly threaded into the argument. The small sounds of a life we had shared. Sound anchored the tension into the room. "Ethan, you don't have to throw everything away tonight." His voice had its practiced calm. It was the tone he used when he wanted to end a conversation without answering. I answered with a movement. I set the bag down near the shoe rack and left the zipper half open where the locket could be seen. The silver glint of the locket, my signature piece, was enough to remind both of us that this was not a sudden packing for a business trip. I slid my hand into my pocket to steady the tiny silver studs at my ears. The doorbell rang, cutting the room off from any thread of normalcy. The sound was a deliberate external event, a third-party interruption that I had planned when I called Luca. My finger went to the locket without thinking. A new shift hit, from anger to fragile hope. The door opened and Luca stepped into the doorway with his hands loose at his sides. He wore a worn brown leather jacket and carried a folder. His presence changed the balance in the room immediately because his posture was steady and because he used names the way a map uses landmarks, Maya Luca. And his voice was steady enough that it grounded the moment. Ethan's face hardened. Luca, he did not move toward him, but he watched him like a man at the edge of a meeting. Luca set the folder on the coffee table and did not smile. I found something on Ethan's laptop. He saved a draft with dates. He also left a time-stamped email ready to send. A second twist hit, a sudden discovery that changed how the earlier evidence read. The feeling shifted inside me from hope back into a cold clarity. It was no longer possible to pretend the marks were accidental. Disbelief flickered across Ethan's face. He reached for the folder. "Give it here, Ethan." Luca tapped the corner of the papers with one finger. "Not until you tell Maya the truth, Ethan." The living room filled with short sentences. "Ethan, what is this?" "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." "Maya, stop." "Ethan." The key, that rapid exchange of names and clipped lines, pushed the argument forward. We did not let it settle into a long monologue. When there were 3 or 4 voices in the room, nearly half the sentences were speech. The room held the specific physicality of a confrontation. Open mail on a table, a steaming kettle left on the counter, shoes by the door, the small packed bag. No metaphors, only things you could point at. Luca pulled a printout from the folder and set it in front of me. The paper had a timestamp and a short paragraph of writing. "Look at the saved draft. It lists dates and places. It says finalize separation in the subject line. It says you will be served papers next week if you don't sign." My hands went numb for a heartbeat. The room narrowed to the paper and the 2 men's faces. I felt the third internal shift then, from fear into a brittle sort of clarity. Clarity is not calm. It is a set of precise cuts. I could see what my choices were. Ethan reached across the table and lunged for the printout. His movement was sudden enough that the coffee on the table trembled. Luca put his hand down on the paper to stop him. For a second the motion was simply physical. 2 hands at an item on a table. Then it wound into anger and panic. "Ethan, stop, Luca. Give her the paper." Ethan's voice rose. "You don't get to—" He tried to yank the folder. The paper slid, the kettle clinked, and the room dissolved into motion. I stepped between them and felt the scrape of fabric when Ethan's hand brushed my arm. The scuffle moved us near the coffee table. A magazine toppled. My breath left me sharp and thin. In 3 lines of argument, accusations flew. "You planned this." "No, I didn't." "Then why the draft?" It was never going to be sent. The exchange was fast and concrete and names kept it tethered. No one said anything poetic. No one made grand pronouncements about fate. They moved, they grabbed, they spoke. Luca, my name, and his hand on my shoulder steadied me. "Maya, do you want me to read it out loud?" I did not. I read the lines myself. The draft had specific language about dates, a proposed timeline for moving out, and a note to notify the landlord. Someone had been building an exit strategy that left me with the role of the surprised partner. The twist landed. This wasn't a secret life hidden for romance or escape. It was a planned departure that treated me like a variable to be managed. Ethan's face had a look I had seen when he created order at work. Solving a problem by trimming options. "Maya, this is complicated. You know I work long hours." "Ethan, you saved a draft titled Finalize Separation." I said the words slowly and held them where he could not dodge them. He swallowed. The 5 o'clock shadow on his jaw was more visible in the overhead light. "I didn't mean to hurt you," the sentence landed and then shifted. Hurt is not one way. Actions create it. My hands felt the locket under my shirt as a tiny anchor. A second external event occurred. The neighbor from downstairs knocked on the door 2 times and then retreated. The apartment felt smaller. I told them both names directly. "Ethan, you either tell me now or I go." Ethan, the repetition of his name forced him to look at me. He did. The clarity in my voice surprised me. Ethan's reply was measured but thin. I thought it would be easier. For both of us. "Ethan? Easier for whom?" I asked. My voice did not shake. I had moved past pleading. The fear was still there, but it had shifted into something that let me act. That is the 4th emotional move. Fear transformed into agency. He tried another approach. "Maya, there are things you don't know. Work demands." Luca slammed his palm on the table. The sound popped in the room. "Ethan, dates, drafts. You left a receipt in the kitchen that matches the hotel photo." "Don't make excuses." Ethan swung toward Luca, and for a moment I saw the man I had married. Controlled, then losing control. He reached for the folder again. Luca stepped in front of him and pushed his hand away. That push made the scuffle physical. A lamp rocked and one bulb hummed differently. The argument had become a collision. I did not try to stop them at first. I watched both of them, cataloging the moves like a witness to my own life. My body responded with a concrete set of sensations. My palms damp, my knees ready to move, my mouth dry. I said, "Stop it." "Both of you." They stopped because my voice cut across them, and because the moment had reached its peak. In that pause I walked back toward the front door. The golden hour light started to soften against the building's glass, a detail I noticed because the outline of the street beyond the glass put time on the clock. I had rehearsed this leaving in my head, but rehearsal is not the act. The threshold choice had to be made in motion. My hand found the locket and I opened it. Inside was a tiny photograph of my mother pouring tea into a chipped cup and smiling. That image was a private thing that had nothing to do with Ethan's plans. I touched the photograph and let it anchor me to a decision. Staying had been about avoiding being alone. Leaving would be about choosing how to live. "Ethan," my name again. "Maya, you can't just..." I turned and looked at him. "Ethan, I stayed because I was afraid to be alone. I can't keep doing that." The words were plain and small, no metaphor, no flourish. They were the truth made compact. I lifted the packed bag and moved to the door. The final climactic beat arrived with a simple action. I stepped through the threshold, and the apartment split into a before and an after by that motion. The door framed my back as I stood on the landing for a second. Luca reached to close it but hesitated. His fingers brushed the doorknob. Ethan moved as if to stop me, and then he did not. He stayed inside. The decision was not a single feeling. It was a sequence: suspicion, fear, anger, clarity, action. Each shift had pushed me forward. The scuffle had proved there was a breach in communication and intention. Luca's evidence had made the breach real. My choice at the threshold made the consequences concrete. Luca left the folder on the table. He stepped beside me on the landing and did not touch my bag. His presence was steady. "Do you want me to come with you?" he asked. "No," I said. I wanted to be the one to close this chapter, not to bolt ahead with someone holding my hand. I wanted the motion to belong to me. Stay with him. Make sure he signs the paper if that's what he wants. Luca's mouth tightened for a moment and then he nodded. "Okay, Maya." I closed the door behind me. The lock clicked. The sound was final in its smallness. On the other side, the apartment carried the living evidence of what had just occurred. A paper on the coffee table, a kettle cooling on the counter, a pair of shoes where they had been tossed. Inside, Ethan sank onto the couch and dug his hands into his head. The apartment was smaller now because a person had left it. At the small cafe on the corner the next morning, I sat with a steaming cup of coffee and the worn silver locket on the table. The barista set the cup down and said my name. I put my fingers around the mug and felt its heat move through my palms. The air in the cafe smelled like roasted beans and lemon soap. I breathed. I read through the prints Luca had left me at the cafe. The draft had specific dates and a plan for dividing bills. It also contained a paragraph where Ethan had written, in a draft line, that he wanted to avoid confrontation by initiating separation. That sentence was small but definitive. It changed the narrative I had told myself for months. That if I pushed, he would respond. Instead, he had constructed an exit that minimized the mess. A woman at the next table coughed and sneezed. Someone else laughed at a phone. Ordinary noises, ordinary life. I found that the fear had not vanished. It sat as a low hum in my hands. But the fear had shifted again, this time into a manageable pressure that let me make practical steps. I called the landlord from the cafe and set up a time to meet him, because now I needed to know what happened if I left. I called my sister and said, "I need a place for a few nights." I arranged for a friend to pick up my extra keys. Action followed the decision. That was how empowerment showed itself, through transactions and phone calls, not speeches. Later that morning, Luca texted to ask if I was all right. I typed a short reply, "I'm okay." I made a choice. He called and left a message asking if I wanted company that evening. I did not accept. I wanted to sit with the locket and my coffee and count the concrete things I needed to do. That evening I would sign the paperwork that finalized my name on the mailbox. Small bureaucratic acts that rearranged a life. The apartment would remain for a time as Ethan's place, because he had stayed in it and wanted to keep it. The saved draft he had left felt like evidence of his attempt to make separation an administrative thing. I walked through that thought until it lost its sting. People can choose to manage endings, and sometimes they do it without confronting the person they are leaving. When I closed the cafe door behind me at noon, the city smelled of warm pavement and distant rain. I held the locket for a second before slipping it into my coat. I moved with the practical resolve of someone who had finally learned to translate fear into a set of actions. Call the landlord, find a temporary bed, sort important papers, change the password on the insurance account. The motions were not dramatic, they were precise. The last paragraphs of the night that followed the threshold were concrete. I walked into a small room my sister had offered and set the packed bag on the bed. I placed the locket on the bedside table beside a steaming cup her brother-in-law had brought. I texted Luca to tell him the folder was safe with me and to ask him to give Ethan time to finish whatever legal steps he planned. Ethan's choice to save a draft had forced the timeline. My choice to cross the threshold had forced the consequence. The apartment had been the scene where intentions and avoidance collided. The threshold had been the place where I turned those collisions into a single action. The story did not end with a rhetorical vow, it ended with a sequence of small practical acts. In the empty apartment, later that night, a lamp stayed on. The kettle cooled. Papers lay where they had fallen. Luca closed the door after watching me leave and left Ethan with the rooms quiet. My packed bag sat on my sister's spare bed. I opened the locket one more time and looked at the photograph of my mother pouring tea. The image was not a promise of a new self. It was a memory I carried and a reason I moved. The last line of the chapter is a simple, concrete event. I locked my sister's bedroom door from the inside, set the packed bag against the wall, and lay down with the locket under my hand, listening to the city beyond the window and the steady beat of my own breath.